I'm Hannah Cole, 24 years old, and on the morning I walked across the stage in my navy gown, 3 front-row seats waited for my family and never filled. The hall swelled with applause that didn't seem to land anywhere near me. It floated overhead like weather passing someone else's field. Near the edge of the steps, my phone trembled, and I let myself hope it was a "we're here" text. Instead, a photo glowed on screen, my mother and my sister's sunglasses on sunlit, on the deck of a gleaming yacht. The caption called my sister our baby girl, and something in my chest went quiet, like a door closing in a house I used to live in. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand tall when the people you wanted most didn't show up. I grew up in a small 2-story outside Boston where winters found their way under the doors, and the kettle was always on a house that taught me how to iron a shirt, stack firewood, and tell the truth even when it was inconvenient. My parents prized neat lawns, good manners, and keeping the peace, and I learned early that being the older one meant smoothing the tablecloth before anyone noticed the wrinkle. Books became my anchor. Numbers felt honest to me, and the path to a degree in data science looked like something you could measure hours worked, credits, earned, results delivered. I didn't come from a family with deep pockets, and money had its own rules inside our walls, but I believed hard work could bridge the gap between what you're handed and what you make of it. When I left for college across town, I carried that hope with a plastic bin of bedding and a second-hand laptop, promising myself I'd pay my own way without complaint. Boston can be beautiful and cold in the same breath, and the first fall on campus taught me both. I learned where the buses ran before dawn, which coffee shop would let me clock in at 5, and how to reach class with the scent of espresso still on my sleeves. It was a different rhythm than the one I'd grown up in, faster and louder, and it showed me a kind of life where no one knew your last name or your family's expectations. They knew whether you showed up on time and turned in the work. I told myself that was enough, that if I kept my head down and moved steadily, the rest would come along: good grades, small savings, maybe even a reason for my parents to see me on my own terms. I still called home on Sundays and sent photos of project posters and course certificates, like postcards from a trip I was taking alone. At home, the air bent a little differently around my sister Ava, and it had for as long as I could remember. I don't say that with bitterness so much as recognition, the way you note a slope in the road and account for it when you drive. She was bright and impulsive, the kind of person who filled a room, and my parents had a softness with her they didn't extend to anybody else. I tried to be the steady one, reliable, quiet about good news, careful not to let my excitement crowd anyone out. Those choices felt natural at the time, taught by 1,000 small moments that added up like sand in a jar. Before you realize it, the jar is full and you're carrying it everywhere. The morning of graduation, the city wore a pale mist, and I let myself imagine the simple scene I'd planned: a wave from the aisle flowers in someone else's hands for once, a family photo with my cap tilted just enough to show my eyes. People pressed into each other in the lobby, laughing and adjusting ties. A father stood on a chair to film, and a mother dabbed at mascara with a tissue. The seats I'd reserved were easy to find, aisle front section, perfect view, and I saved the 2 spaces beside me with a sweater and my program until an usher asked me to step into line. It's strange how much weight an empty chair can carry when it belongs to the person you were certain would fill it. I thought I heard my name called from somewhere just as the ceremony began, but it was only the careful voice of the dean, reading pages of names, steady as a metronome. When the phone buzzed, I slipped a look, because hope has a way of outliving its welcome. I saw the water first, a sheet of bright blue rolling to the edge of the picture, and then my mother's smile, then Ava's glass raised toward the sun. The caption was short and warm, and not meant for me. That's the thing about certain moments: they don't announce themselves as turning points. They slide in quietly and rearrange the furniture inside you. I stood in place on the stage, nodded to the faculty line, and felt the applause land in the seats to my left and right, where other families leaned in to claim their share of the day. Afterward, the crowd loosened, and the lobby became a hive of hugs and camera clicks. I stepped into the cool hallway to breathe, and found the nearest window, the glass fogging a little under my breath. The plan had been lunch at a small place down by the water, a table I'd booked 2 months earlier, with a deposit I'd saved in small bills, the kind of room where you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. I pressed my thumb to the reservation in my phone, canceled it, and watched the confirmation email arrive without ceremony. There wasn't a grand conclusion to draw from any of it, not yet, just the knowledge that a day I'd built with care didn't belong to me the way I thought it would. I slipped the program into my bag, careful not to crease the page where my name sat in neat black letters. I wish I could say that moment surprised me, but if I'm honest, it didn't come out of nowhere. It grew from soil I knew well. Small choices, gentle explanations, a family rhythm that gave more warmth to one child than the other, and called it balance. Still, even when something has a shape you recognize, it doesn't hurt less when you hold it up to the light. I went home with the cap under my arm and set the gown over the back of a chair, standing a little longer than necessary by the window, while the city moved on without me. I told myself I'd remember the good parts, the tassels swinging in unison, the drum of footsteps across the stage, the feel of the diploma paper between my fingers, and I would in time. There's a beginning to every story, and sometimes it is not the one you thought you were writing. Mine began with 3 empty seats and a photograph from a boat I didn't board, and it asked me a question I couldn't ignore anymore. What do you do when home claps for someone else while you're standing on your own stage? The answer wouldn't come that day. It would arrive in pieces, nudged along by memories I'd tried to file away neatly, the birthday candles that never made it past the kitchen table, the gentle warnings not to make a big deal, the long list of promised tomorrows. I didn't know it then, but the next piece was waiting just around the corner, ready to show me how early the pattern had started and how deep it ran. When I was a kid, I used to think love in a family was something you earned by doing well. I believed if I tried hard enough, kept my grades high, stayed polite, made things easy, then warmth would come naturally like sunshine after rain. But the older I grew, the more it seemed that love in our house had already been divided long before I was old enough to notice. My mother called Ava the little light of the family, a phrase that drifted through every conversation like background music. When people visited, she introduced us that way, Ava with her curls and soft laugh, and me, our dependable one. That word dependable sounded kind, but it built a wall I could never climb. I remember my 8th birthday better than most others. Mom came home with a small white box from the bakery on Main Street, 1-layer vanilla nothing written on top. She placed it on the kitchen table while still on a phone call, waving for me to blow out the candles before they dripped onto the frosting. "You're growing up, Han," she said with a smile that barely reached her eyes. "No need to make a big deal of it." I nodded, thinking that maybe this was what growing up meant, learning to ask for less. 2 months later, when Ava turned 5, the whole house transformed. Streamers looped through the hallway, our front yard filled with neighbors, and a rented clown played music so loud it rattled the windows. There were balloons shaped like crowns, and Mom danced with her while Dad filmed from the porch. I remember holding a half-melted scoop of ice cream sitting on the back step, telling myself not to feel jealous. I told myself she was the baby, and that was just how things worked. School became the one place that felt fair. Teachers noticed effort there, not charm. I loved the quiet reward of numbers adding up neatly of grades printed in ink that couldn't be undone. When I brought home certificates, Mom barely looked at them. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, "but don't brag your sister's still finding her thing." I started leaving them in my backpack instead. I told classmates my parents were too busy to attend awards night, which wasn't exactly a lie. They were usually at Ava's dance recitals or art fairs, sitting in the front row clapping until their hands turned red. I watched from the back whenever I could, telling myself I didn't need applause to know I'd done well. Still, it's strange how silence can echo louder than any cheer. There was one day in middle school when Ava knocked over a glass vase in the living room, an heirloom from our grandmother, Mom said, though I'd never seen it displayed until then. I wasn't even home when it broke. But when my parents came in from work and saw the mess, they called for me first. "You're the older sister," Dad said sharply. "Why weren't you watching her?" I tried to explain that I had stayed late at the library, but he was already gathering the pieces, muttering about responsibility. Ava stood behind them, lip trembling, and within seconds they were comforting her, telling her it was okay. I remember standing a few feet away, my throat tight, wondering why every story in our house seemed to have the same ending: Ava crying, me apologizing. When I turned 12, I was invited to a week-long science camp in Vermont. Only a few students were chosen, and the letter had my name typed neatly at the top. I ran home, heart pounding, imagining my parents proud for once. Dad read it, then set it down without comment. "You should think about staying home to help your mother. Who's going to tutor Ava if you're gone?" The paper crinkled in my hands as I nodded. 2 weeks later, Ava got a role as the spring fairy in her school play, and the entire family went. Mom brought flowers. Dad filmed the whole thing. When the curtain rose, Ava spotted me in the back row and waved a tiny sparkle of joy that I tried to hold on to. But even that moment belonged more to her than to me. By high school, I had stopped expecting fairness. I learned to translate silence into acceptance, indifference into trust. I studied late into the night, often sitting at the small desk I'd built from a yard sale table, working until my eyes burned. Achievements became a kind of language between me and the world, even if my parents didn't speak it. When I got into Northeastern with a partial scholarship, I thought maybe that would be the thing to bridge the gap. My acceptance letter felt like proof that effort mattered, that I could earn a new beginning. I placed it carefully on the kitchen counter one evening, waiting for them to see it. Dad finally picked it up, read a few lines, and said, "Good. Now it's time you start taking responsibility. College isn't cheap," Mom added. "At least you have a scholarship. That's more than most get." Her voice was calm, final. I smiled, but inside something small cracked the part of me that still believed love might follow accomplishment. College life began at dawn most days. My alarm rang at 4:45, and by 5 I was tying my apron at the cafe on Huntington Avenue. The regulars came in half awake, and I learned their orders by heart: double espresso almond milk latte, large black with room. When my shift ended at 8:30, I'd sprint across campus to make my 9 o'clock lecture, my hands smelling faintly of coffee grounds. Afternoons belonged to tutoring sessions, and nights to freelance writing for an educational website. It wasn't the kind of schedule anyone could sustain forever, but it kept the lights on and the tuition paid. The first winter I fainted during a data theory lecture. I woke up in the campus health office with a nurse pressing a cool cloth to my forehead. "Want me to call your family?" she asked gently. I nodded before I could stop myself. When Mom finally picked up, my voice came out small. "I just fainted in class. I think I've been overdoing it." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Don't be dramatic, Hannah. You're strong. Just rest and drink water." The line went dead before I could reply. I lay there listening to the hum of the air conditioner and realized I'd expected too much again. Weeks passed, and Ava's name kept appearing on my phone, not calling just in photos. Her college plans hadn't worked out, but she'd enrolled in an art program in Florence. The pictures showed her in a silk dress under cathedral arches, smiling beside fountains. Mom's captions called her our artist, our dreamer, each one warmer than the last. When I asked Dad once for $200 to buy programming books, he told me to figure it out. So I did another tutoring client, another skipped meal, another late night. The gap between our worlds grew so wide it stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like fact. One winter evening, I was scrolling through my phone after another long shift when a post froze me in place. Ava's birthday dinner, roses, candles, wine, and in her hands a box holding a gold watch, a Rolex. Mom's caption said, "Our baby girl deserves the best." I set the phone down, staring at the small desk where my instant noodles waited to be stirred. The watch alone could have paid for the tuition balance I'd been begging help with for weeks. I thought of the student loan forms still spread across my bed, the interest rates I didn't fully understand, yet the weight of signing something that might follow me for years. Outside wind pressed against the window pane, and for a moment I wished I could disappear into the sound. I borrowed the money, $15,000. The loan officer smiled when she slid the papers toward me. "Plenty of students borrow," she said lightly, as if that made it easier. The pen felt heavy in my hand. When I walked outside, the winter air hit my face sharp and clean, and I told myself this was independence, that someday it would be worth it. That night, sitting in the quiet of my dorm, I opened my laptop and began typing, not for class or work, but because I had to. I wrote pages about the years of trying, about birthdays that passed with quiet dinners, about the small ways people can forget someone who never stops showing up. It wasn't anger exactly, more like exhaustion that had nowhere else to go. When the words ran out, I stared at the blinking cursor and realized I didn't know what would come next. Still, I folded the loan documents carefully into a folder, taped the edges shut, and set it on the desk beside my textbooks. I promised myself I'd never ask my parents for help again. But promises made in pain are fragile things. I didn't know then that one more test of loyalty was waiting, the day I'd have to choose whether to keep believing in family or finally believe in myself. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that lives beneath the skin. It isn't from lack of sleep or too much work. It's the kind that builds when you keep pretending you don't feel forgotten. After signing the student loan papers, I kept moving the way I always had, one shift, one class, one late-night tutoring session at a time. But something inside me began to change. I started noticing how often my parents called only when they needed something, how every conversation seemed to circle back to Ava. The distance between us had become its own language, and I was the only one still trying to translate it. By my 5th semester, the pressure became impossible to ignore. My scholarship covered half of the new tuition bill, but the rest loomed like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I picked up extra hours at the cafe and took on 2 new students for tutoring. I even accepted small writing jobs that paid next to nothing just to close the gap. No matter how many hours I worked, the total still fell short. $10,000 stood between me and the chance to finish school on time. Every night I calculated numbers until the screen blurred, convincing myself there had to be another way. Eventually, I stopped pretending and made the call I had dreaded since the semester began. Dad answered on the 3rd ring. "Hannah." He said, his tone calm but distant, the same voice he used when reminding me to take out the trash as a teenager. I hesitated before speaking. "I'm short on tuition this semester. I've been working every shift I can, but I still need help. Even a portion would make a difference." There was silence, followed by a sigh that carried more disapproval than concern. "You've always been smart," he said finally. "You'll figure it out. Your sister really needs support right now." In the background, I heard Mom's voice, steady and unhurried. "If it's that bad, take a semester off. Work more. There's no reason to rush." My hand tightened around the phone, but I forced my voice to stay even. "I just need to stay enrolled," I said softly. "If I stop now, I might not go back." No one answered. The call ended with a quiet click, leaving the room colder than before. The next morning, I sat at the financial aid office, waiting to sign another set of loan forms. The woman behind the desk smiled politely as she handed me a pen. "You're not alone," she said kindly. "Most students borrow." I nodded, though her words didn't land the way she meant them to. Outside, the sky was colorless, and the wind bit at my face as I walked back across campus. It felt like carrying a weight I hadn't earned, but there was no one else to bear it. I went home, filled a pot with water, and cooked another packet of instant noodles. The smell reminded me of every night I'd stayed awake past midnight, working toward a future my parents never cared to see. My phone buzzed just as I sat down. For a moment, I hoped it was Dad calling to apologize. Instead, it was a photo alert from social media. Ava stood in front of a long dining table covered in roses and candles, her smile as bright as the glass of champagne in her hand. The caption said, "Best birthday ever. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for the amazing gift." Beneath the words was a picture of her opening a small velvet box, a gold Rolex, catching the candlelight. I stared until the image blurred. The number that had haunted me all week, $10,000, flashed in my mind, matching the price of the watch almost exactly. My hands began to shake, and the noodles went cold beside me. It wasn't the money that stung most. It was the clear message that no matter how hard I worked, I would always come second. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk with my laptop open, typing words that didn't belong to any assignment. I wrote about the vase. I didn't break the scholarship. They dismissed the phone call that ended in silence. I wrote because I needed to hear my own voice again, even if no one else would. The words spilled faster than I could think, and when I finally stopped, the screen glowed with everything I'd never said aloud. I closed the lid and sat back, the quiet of the room pressing against me. The radiator hummed faintly, the only sound breaking the stillness. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. The days that followed blurred into routine. I worked, studied, and smiled when people asked how I was doing. But underneath, something hard was taking shape, a kind of resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I told myself I would finish no matter what it cost. When classmates complained about midterms, I listened and nodded, never mentioning the loan payments that already hung over me. Every morning, I walked past the scholarship board near the library, reading the names of students whose families had come to their ceremonies, whose photos hung proudly in frames. I never looked for my own name. I didn't need another reminder of how invisible I'd become. Months passed. The semester wound down, and the campus bloomed again with spring flowers that smelled faintly of renewal. I wanted to feel that way too, renewed, but instead I carried the same ache from winter. Still, when I looked ahead to graduation, a small hope stirred inside me. I imagined walking across the stage, seeing my parents smiling from the audience, Ava clapping beside them. I pictured dinner afterward, laughter filling the space that had been quiet for too long. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to keep me moving. I started saving every extra dollar. After each tutoring session, I tucked small bills into an envelope marked graduation. At the cafe, I collected tips in a jar on my desk, even the coins that others left behind. Over 2 months, the envelope grew thicker. When I finally counted it, there was just enough to reserve a table at a small Italian restaurant by the harbor, a place with warm lights and a view of the water. It wasn't fancy, but to me it felt like a dream. I pictured Mom adjusting her napkin, Dad complimenting the pasta, Ava teasing me for tearing up. It would be the first real celebration we'd had in years. The night before the ceremony, I laid my graduation gown over the back of a chair and placed my cap beside it. On the table sat a bouquet of purple tulips I had bought for myself, the same kind I'd always loved as a child. I wrote a message in our family group chat, careful to make it sound cheerful. Tomorrow at 9, main auditorium. Family seats reserved in row A, section D, seats 3. Afterward lunch at the harbor restaurant, 12:15. Hope you can all come. I read it twice before hitting send. The message showed as seen within minutes, but no one replied. I waited an hour, convincing myself they were planning a surprise. The silence felt familiar, but that night it hurt in a way I hadn't expected. I woke before dawn the next morning. The city outside was covered in mist streetlights flickering against the damp air. I dressed slowly, careful not to wrinkle my gown, and picked up the tulips on my way out. By the time I reached the auditorium, the place buzzed with laughter and camera flashes. Families filled the aisles, hugging and calling names, waving banners and flowers. I searched the front row, row A, section D. The 3 seats I'd reserved were empty. My heart sank, but I kept looking, scanning faces for any sign of them. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage, smiling as best I could. The applause was warm, but not for me. It was the sound of hundreds of other families celebrating together. As I accepted my diploma, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I waited until I was off stage before checking. The screen lit up with a familiar glow, a new post from my mother. She stood on a yacht deck beside Ava, both in sunglasses, the ocean behind them shimmering under a Caribbean sun. The caption read, "So proud of our baby girl, living her best life after exams." I stared at the photo until my hands went numb. The world around me blurred, the cheers, the cameras, the bright stage lights. All I could see were the 3 empty seats I'd saved. After the ceremony, I walked outside past families taking pictures and graduates posing with their parents. I found a bench by the fountain and sat down, still holding the tulips. The petals trembled slightly in the breeze. I deleted the social media app from my phone and stared at the water until the crowd thinned. Then I walked to the restaurant by the harbor and told the manager I needed to cancel my reservation. He gave me a kind smile and said, "I'm sorry, miss. Must have been a busy day for them." I thanked him, left a small tip, and stepped back into the wind. The smell of salt and smoke drifted from the docks, and for a moment I just stood there watching the boat sway against the tide. That night, my apartment felt smaller than ever. I hung my gown on the wall, placed the diploma on my desk, and dropped the tulips onto the chair. Their color was fading already, the petals curling inward as if they knew the day had ended. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing my palms over my eyes. For the first time in 4 years, I let myself cry without holding back. The sound filled the room raw and quiet, like something long-caged finally escaping. When the tears stopped, I whispered into the still air, not expecting an answer. Maybe I never really had a family. The next morning, the gown still hung untouched, and the tulips had wilted completely. I opened my notebook, wrote a single sentence, and closed it again. Something ends today. I didn't know what would come next, only that I couldn't keep pretending things would ever change. Somewhere inside, a door had closed for good, and another somewhere I couldn't yet see was waiting to open. 3 days passed after graduation before my phone finally rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen, and my chest tightened. For a second, I thought maybe she'd realized what that day had meant to me, that she would apologize, or at least ask how it went. I sat at my small kitchen table, the afternoon light falling through the blinds, and answered. Her voice came through bright and casual. "Hannah, can you send your sister $700? We overspent on the trip, and cruises cost more than we thought." I stared at the phone, unsure I'd heard her right. The image of the empty seats, the tulips wilting on the chair beside my bed, and the photo of Ava laughing on that yacht, all of it rushed back in one breath. My voice came out unsteady. "Mom, why is it always me? I don't have money. I had to take out loans just to finish school. I'm already working every hour I can." There was a long silence on the line, then a sigh. "You're strong, honey. You've always been independent. Ava's more fragile. She needs extra help." Those words struck something deep, something that had been waiting years to surface. My throat tightened. "You never ask if I need anything. You never ask if I'm okay." The air between us grew heavy, the kind that signals a storm before the rain begins. My mother's voice hardened. "You don't understand what sacrifice means. You've always had things easier than you think." Before I could reply, my father's voice replaced hers, sharp and angry. "The more you study, the more ungrateful you become. We've given you everything, and now you call to complain. If you want to live on your own, then do it. Don't call us again." The call ended with a hollow click that echoed in the room long after the line went dead. I sat there staring at the black screen, my reflection faint against the glass. The silence pressed down until I could barely breathe. For the first time, I understood that love in our family came with conditions: obedience, silence, sacrifice. Without those, it disappeared completely. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The city lights were just starting to flicker on each one, distant and unreachable. That night I opened the notebook I'd kept since freshman year, the one filled with notes about scholarships, shifts, small victories, and reminders to keep going. My hand trembled as I wrote, "They said not to call again. Maybe it's time I finally don't." I closed it and set it beside my diploma on the desk. The two objects looked strange together, one a symbol of achievement, the other a quiet record of endurance. The room felt smaller yet clearer somehow, as if I was finally seeing it for what it was, a space I'd built on my own, without their help or their approval. The following days passed in a blur. I still went to work, still smiled at customers, still met my tutoring students, but inside everything felt muted. At night I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint traffic outside. The loneliness was heavy, but so was the calm that came with it. It was the first time I wasn't waiting for their calls or their permission to feel proud of myself. Still, a part of me ached for something familiar, a voice that didn't demand or dismiss. So that weekend I packed a small bag and bought a bus ticket to Cape Cod. The ride took 4 hours. The landscape shifted from city skylines to open roads lined with pine trees. When the bus stopped, the sea air met me like a memory. My grandmother Eleanor stood by her old blue sedan, wrapped in her beige sweater. Her smile reached all the way to her eyes. "Hannah," she said softly, pulling me into her arms. "You've grown so thin." Behind her, my grandfather Walter waved from the porch, his cane balanced against the railing. I hadn't seen them in nearly a year, but their presence felt like home in a way my parents never did. Inside the house smelled of roasted salmon and lemon. The table was already set, warm light spilling over the china plates they only used when family visited. We ate slowly, talking about the town, the garden, the neighbor's new puppy, everything but the thing sitting unspoken between us. Finally, Grandma set her fork down and looked at me. "We heard about your graduation," she said gently. "Why didn't your parents come?" I hesitated, staring at my hands. The words caught in my throat, then came out in a quiet rush. I told them everything: the empty seats, the photo on the yacht, the phone call afterward, asking for money. I told them about the loans, the long shifts, and the years of being told to stay quiet for Ava's sake. When I finished, the room was still. My grandfather's face turned pale with disbelief. "Hannah," he said slowly, "we've been sending your parents $1,500 every month for years to help with tuition for both of you. Are you saying you never received a cent of that?" The question hung there, heavy and impossible. I looked at him, my mouth dry. "No," I said, "I didn't know." The chair creaked as he pushed back from the table, his hands trembling. "All this time," his voice broke. Grandma reached for my hand, her eyes glistening. "We thought they were supporting you both equally. We had no idea, sweetheart." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The clock ticked softly in the kitchen, and outside a gull cried somewhere near the shore. The truth settled over me like a cold wave. Every dollar meant for both of us had gone straight to Ava, the art school in Florence, the trips, the gifts. And all those times my parents said, "We can't help right now," they'd already had the means to. My chest felt tight, not from anger this time, but from a quiet, exhausted kind of grief. My grandfather's voice shook with emotion. "From this day forward, we're not sending them another dime. That money will go directly to you, not because you need charity, but because it's yours by right." My grandmother nodded, sliding a small envelope across the table. "We've saved some aside," she said, $5,000. "Take it, Hannah. Pay off part of your debt. Start fresh." I opened my mouth to protest, but she squeezed my hand firmly. "You've carried enough on your own," she said softly. "You don't have to anymore." I looked between them, the kindness in their faces undoing me completely. Tears blurred my vision, and for the first time in years I let myself cry without shame. My grandfather stood slowly and placed his hand on my shoulder. "You've made us proud, sweetheart. More than you know." That night I slept in the small attic room that used to be mine as a child. The ceiling smelled faintly of pine, and the sound of the ocean drifted through the window. Lying there, I thought about all the years I'd blamed myself for not being enough, for not trying hard enough to earn their love. But here in this quiet house, I realized I'd been loved all along, just not by the people I'd spent my life chasing. When morning came, Grandma made coffee and packed leftovers for me to take back to Boston. As I slipped on my coat, Grandpa handed me a folded check, his handwriting neat across the top. "Consider this a correction, not a gift," he said. I hugged them both, promising to visit soon. The bus ride back felt lighter somehow. I watched the coastline fade through the window and thought about the word family, how it could break you and heal you in equal measure. I didn't know what my parents would say when they found out, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done being quiet. When I stepped off the bus that afternoon, the city air felt different. My phone buzzed in my pocket and the screen flashed with my father's name. I didn't answer, not yet. I let it ring until the sound faded, standing on the sidewalk with the envelope clutched in my hand. Somewhere inside me, a new kind of calm was forming, the kind that comes when you stop asking for what someone will never give. I didn't know then how quickly the peace would be tested or how far my parents would go to reclaim control. But as I walked home under the gray Boston sky, I felt steady for the first time in years, ready for whatever storm might come next. The call came only a week after I returned from Cape Cod. I had just finished my evening shift at the cafe and was wiping down tables when my phone started buzzing. The name on the screen made my stomach drop, Dad. I hesitated before answering, knowing whatever waited on the other end wouldn't sound like concern. His voice came sharp and quick, cutting through the background noise. "Hannah, what did you tell your grandparents? They called us this morning furious. You've twisted everything. You made us look like thieves." I gripped the edge of the counter, the cloth still in my hand. I didn't twist anything I said, keeping my voice calm. I told them the truth, that I've been paying my way and never saw a dime of the money they sent. There was a brief, startled pause. Then my mother's voice joined his high and shaking with anger. "You ungrateful girl! We raised you, we sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay us, by turning our own parents against us." Their words came like a flood, accusation after accusation, until I could barely separate one from the next. I waited for a lull, then spoke quietly but clearly. "You're angry because you've been caught. I didn't make up anything. I just stopped pretending." The silence that followed stretched so long I thought they'd hung up. Then my father's voice thundered through the receiver. "From this moment on, you're no longer our daughter. You've made your choice." The line went dead before I could answer. I stood there in the dim cafe, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space where their voices had been. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just stood still, feeling something heavy lift inside me, replaced by a quiet resolve I couldn't name yet. The next day, my grandparents called. Grandma's voice trembled at first, but she steadied it. "Hannah, sweetheart, we want you to know we're proud of you for telling the truth. What they did was wrong, and we've made some decisions." Later that afternoon, I received a call from their attorney, a man named Thomas Reed, who spoke with the kind patience of someone used to delivering difficult news. "Miss Cole," he began, "your grandparents have formally redirected all financial trusts and properties in your name. That includes the education fund and the Cape Cod home. They wanted me to emphasize this isn't a reward, it's the restoration of fairness." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words blurred together, redirected ownership restoration. I heard myself whisper, "Are you sure?" He chuckled softly. "Quite sure. They insisted you hear it from me directly." When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the sunlight spilling across the floor. I didn't think about the money or the property. What struck me most was the word fairness. It was something I had stopped expecting years ago. The news reached my parents faster than I thought possible. The next evening, while I was tutoring a student online, my phone began ringing nonstop. First Mom, then Dad, alternating calls, until I finally picked up. Their voices came at me together this time, overlapping with fury. "You've stolen from this family," Dad shouted. "You manipulated two old people into cutting us out of everything." Mom's voice followed, trembling with rage. "You'll regret this, Hannah. Don't think your grandparents will protect you forever. When they're gone, you'll be left with nothing." I let them finish, then spoke calmly. "If my grandparents pass, I'll still have the memory that they saw me for who I am. You'll still be the parents who chose to abandon me." The line went silent except for the sound of their breathing. Then Dad snapped, "You don't deserve to be part of this bloodline." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Maybe not," I said softly. "But I finally know what it means to belong somewhere, and for the first time, I was the one who ended the call." That night, I spread the documents the lawyer had emailed across my kitchen table. The legal language felt foreign, all signatures and seals, but one line stood out clearly. "All educational and property holdings shall transfer solely to Hannah Cole." I traced the words with my finger and felt an unfamiliar peace settle in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, just release. Over the next week, I began to breathe differently. The anxiety that had always sat like a stone in my stomach began to fade. I paid off a portion of my student loans and closed the notebook that had tracked every cent of debt I owed. It felt like setting down a weight I'd carried for too long. One evening after work, I brewed tea and sat by the window looking out over the quiet street below. The city lights shimmered through the thin curtain, and for the first time I wasn't planning my next move out of fear. I was planning because I could. I wanted a fresh start somewhere my name didn't carry the echo of old arguments or family expectations. I emailed Mr. Reed asking him to handle the property transfer paperwork for the Cape Cod home. I told him I wanted my grandparents to stay there as long as they wished, rent-free, and that I only hoped to visit during the summers. His reply came within an hour. "Your grandparents will be touched by your thoughtfulness," he wrote. "You've handled this with grace, Miss Cole." When I closed the laptop, I realized I was smiling without effort. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt like mine. On the wall beside my desk hung my diploma framed at last, and next to it a photo I'd taken years earlier of the Cape Cod shoreline, the one place that had always felt safe. Days later, I received another call from my father, but this time I didn't answer. The voicemail that followed was brief, his voice cold but tired. "You've turned everyone against us. I hope you're proud." I listened once, then deleted it. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. Some conversations lose their meaning once the truth is finally spoken. That weekend, I packed away the last of my college notebooks and placed them in a small box labeled Past. It wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about making room for something new. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window again, and opened my laptop to search for jobs. By Monday morning, I had an interview lined up at a data analytics firm in New York. The thought of leaving Boston felt strange but right, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. I called my grandparents to tell them, and Grandma's voice brightened instantly. "Oh, Hannah, that sounds wonderful. You've earned this chance," Grandpa added from somewhere in the background. "Make the world see what we already know." When we hung up, I looked around the apartment one last time. The memories inside it were heavy nights of worry, of missed calls, of small victories no one else noticed. I took one deep breath, exhaled, and began to pack. The morning I left Boston, the sky was pale and clear. I loaded my suitcase into the back of a rideshare, glancing once at the city skyline before it disappeared behind the rising highway. The road stretched ahead open and unassuming. For the first time, it didn't matter what waited on the other side of the horizon. I was free to choose. Somewhere between the quiet hum of the car and the rhythm of the passing lights, I thought of my parents again, not with anger, but with a distant kind of sadness. Their voices had faded, replaced by the echo of something stronger, my own. I didn't know exactly what lay ahead in New York, but I knew this much. The silence that once felt like punishment now sounded like peace. The city came into view as the sun began to rise, its light spilling over the skyline. I pressed my hand against the window and whispered a promise to myself, one I intended to keep. I would build a life that no one could take credit for, but me. As the car crossed into Manhattan, I felt the shift like a heartbeat, an ending behind me, a beginning waiting just ahead. What I didn't know yet was that the next chapter wouldn't just be about survival anymore. It would be about finally stepping into the kind of life I'd fought for all along. New York welcomed me with noise. Horns, footsteps, distant laughter, it all wove together into something alive. My apartment sat above a laundromat in Queens, small enough that if I stretched my arms wide, I could nearly touch both walls. But it was mine. The first night I slept there, I left the window cracked just to hear the city hum, letting it replace the silence I'd known for too long. 2 weeks later, I started my new job at a data analytics firm in Manhattan. The office was open and bright, the kind of place where people carried coffee in one hand and confidence in the other. My manager, Elliot Parker, greeted me that morning with a quick smile. "You're Hannah Wright. We've been looking forward to having you." There was no trace of the doubt I'd grown used to hearing in other people's voices. I felt something loosen in my chest. The work came naturally. I spent my days studying patterns, building systems that made sense of chaos, something I'd been doing in my own life for years. My coworkers noticed quickly, especially Sophia Nguyen, who sat across from me and shared her lunch on days I forgot to pack one. "You're too quiet," she teased one afternoon as we sifted through spreadsheets. "That's how people miss how smart you are." I smiled, but she didn't know that quiet had been my survival for most of my life. At night, the apartment grew warm with the scent of takeout and the steady rhythm of the trains below. I began to build routines again. Grocery lists, morning jogs through the park, calls to my grandparents every Sunday. Each small act stitched a little piece back into me. Sometimes I still caught myself reaching for the phone to call my parents before remembering the silence waiting on the other end. Those moments passed quicker now. One Friday evening, I walked home from the subway just as the sky was fading to deep gold. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Mr. Reed, my grandparents' attorney. Property transfer completed successfully. All records finalized in your name. Congratulations. The word congratulations looked strange beside the address of the Cape Cod home. I stared at it for a long time before closing the message. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the final page of a story I hadn't chosen to write. That weekend, I decided to visit Cape Cod for the first time since the papers were signed. The drive from New York took 5 hours, and as soon as I crossed the bridge, the air changed the salt, the pine, the hush of ocean wind. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, Grandpa was sitting on the porch, the afternoon sun on his face. He lifted his cane slightly in greeting. "You look like you belong here," he said. Grandma came out with 2 glasses of lemonade, her smile soft. "Your hair's longer," she said, "and you look rested." We spent the evening walking along the beach behind the house. The sand was cool underfoot, and the tide stretched out like glass. I hadn't realized how much I missed the quiet until I heard it again. At dinner, Grandpa talked about the garden, Grandma about her book club, and for the first time, the conversation wasn't about fixing anything. It was just about being together. When I left the next morning, Grandma handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a note written in her neat handwriting. "You deserve peace, Hannah. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Back in New York, the weeks moved quickly. Work grew busier. My team landed a big project with a new client, and Elliot began relying on me more. Late nights at the office turned into early mornings with coffee, but I didn't mind. For the first time in years, exhaustion came from purpose, not survival. One evening after a long day, I stopped at a grocery store near my apartment. The checkout line was slow, so I scrolled through my phone to pass the time. Without meaning to, I opened social media, the same account I hadn't touched since graduation. The first thing that appeared was a photo of Ava. She stood beside my parents at what looked like a garden party, her hand resting on my mother's shoulder. The caption read, "Family is everything." Beneath it, dozens of comments from friends and neighbors praised them. I stared at it for a moment, then quietly closed the app and slid the phone into my bag. Some wounds didn't need reopening. A few days later, Elliot stopped by my desk just as I was shutting down my computer. "You free for a quick talk?" he asked. I followed him into a small conference room overlooking the city. He closed the door and turned smiling. "I've been impressed with your work. You think about problems differently. I'd like to move you to a lead analyst role." For a moment, I couldn't speak. He went on explaining the salary increase and benefits, but my mind was somewhere else, back to the nights in Boston when I'd fainted from exhaustion, when no one had called to ask if I was okay. "Thank you," I finally said. "I won't let you down." He grinned. "I know." When I walked out of that room, the city felt lighter, as if every building had exhaled with me. That weekend, I celebrated quietly with Sophia at a small diner near the office. She raised her glass of iced tea. To Hannah, she said, "The quiet storm." We laughed, and for once I didn't correct her. Quiet could be strength, too. A few nights later, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. The name flashing on the screen froze me where I stood. Mom. My hand hovered over the answer button before I finally pressed it. Her voice came through, careful and almost fragile. "Hannah," she said softly, "we heard about the job. Congratulations." The words caught me off guard. "Thank you," I replied, unsure what to expect next. There was a pause, then a sigh. "Your father and we've been thinking. Maybe we could have dinner when you're next in Boston. It's been a long time." I could hear the hesitation in her tone, the careful phrasing of someone testing fragile ground. I looked around my small apartment, the books stacked neatly, the plants by the window, the framed photo of my grandparents on the shelf. "I'll think about it," I said gently. She exhaled, maybe with relief, maybe with disappointment. "All right," she said quietly. "Take care of yourself, Hannah." The line went still after she hung up. I stood there for a while, the city humming outside my window, and realized I didn't feel the panic I once did after hearing her voice. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I had already built a life where peace didn't depend on anyone else's choice. That night, I opened my laptop and began drafting a plan for a small side project I'd been considering, a financial literacy program for young women, inspired by all the lessons I'd learned the hard way. I didn't know where it would lead, but it felt right. The next morning, I printed the first outline and pinned it above my desk. As the sun rose over the city, I poured coffee into a mug and watched light spill across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, the world was already rushing ahead, horns blaring, trains, groaning voices overlapping, but in my small apartment, everything was still. I felt steady, ready, and no longer afraid of what might come next. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet sense of balance wouldn't last long. The past had a way of knocking on the door just when you started believing it had finally learned to stay away. The call from my mother came late one night in early spring, almost a year after I'd moved to New York. The city outside my window was quiet for once, washed in silver light from a half moon. I nearly ignored the ringing, assuming it was another pocket dial or mistaken call, but something in me said to answer. Her voice came soft at first, almost hesitant. "Hannah, I didn't know who else to call." For a moment, I couldn't speak. It had been months since we last talked, and the memory of our last conversation still lingered sharp, unfinished. I steadied my voice. "What's wrong?" She hesitated. "Your father's company. There's been a problem. A bad one. He's been asked to step down. People are talking." I heard her draw a shaky breath. "We could lose the house. And your sister. She's frightened." I leaned against the counter, my hand gripping the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" The question came out gentler than I expected. "Because," she whispered, "you've always known how to fix things." The room went still, the same pattern again. Something broke and they turned to me to hold it together. I felt an old ache stir beneath my ribs, one I thought I'd buried. "Mom," I said quietly, "you made it clear I wasn't part of this family anymore." Her voice cracked. "I said things I shouldn't have. We both did. But please, Hannah, we don't know where else to turn." I closed my eyes. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, growing distant as it moved down the street. I could almost see her standing in the kitchen of the old house, clutching the phone the way she used to when she called about bills or repairs. I took a slow breath. "I'll think about it," I said finally. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I wanted to feel indifferent, but part of me still pictured my father's face, the man who'd once taught me to ride a bike, who'd clapped when I solved my first math problem. Somewhere along the way, he'd turned that pride into competition. Still, the thought of them losing everything didn't bring me peace. It only made me tired. The next day at work, I found it hard to focus. Elliot noticed as soon as I dropped a stack of printouts on my desk. "You okay?" he asked, setting down his coffee. I nodded, but he wasn't convinced. "Take the afternoon if you need it," he said. "Whatever's going on, you'll think clearer when you're not running on fumes." I thanked him and stepped outside, walking aimlessly until I ended up by the Hudson. The river moved slow under the pale light and the cold air stung my cheeks. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Grandma's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and steady as always. "Sweetheart, she said you sound far away." "I am," I replied. "Mom called last night. Dad's company's in trouble. She asked for help." There was a pause, followed by the faint clink of her teacup being set down. "I wondered when that day would come," she said softly. "What are you thinking?" I told her the truth, that I didn't want to go back, not even for a moment. Every time I try to help them, it costs me something, I said. "But they sound desperate." "Hannah," she said gently, "helping doesn't always mean giving. Sometimes it means showing people what accountability looks like. Whatever you decide, do it with a clear heart, not guilt." Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. That evening, I sat by the window and opened my old financial notebook, the same one I'd kept through college. I flipped past pages of budgets and loan totals until I reached a blank sheet. Then I wrote a single line at the top. "Boundaries are not cruelty." 2 days later, I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring. "Mom." I said I can help you find someone to look at Dad's finances, but I won't give you money. Not directly. Her voice trembled. We don't need an accountant, Hannah. We need family. I took a breath. Family should have been there when I needed them. You have to understand I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. There was silence, then a faint sob. Your father's pride won't survive this, she said quietly. He's already lost so much. I'm sorry, I said, but this time you'll have to face what you built. I hung up before she could answer. My hands shook, but not from regret. It was the first time I'd drawn a line and meant it. The next week, my grandparents called to say they'd heard from my mother. She's upset, Grandpa said, but maybe it's what needed to happen. Grandma added softly, sometimes truth only takes root in hard soil. By then, word had spread about my father's company. A small article appeared in the local paper back in Boston Cole and Partners faces internal audit. Founder steps down. I read it once, folded the screen closed, and went on with my day. At work, things moved fast. The project I'd led for months went live, earning praise from our biggest client. Elliot called me into his office, grinning. You're not just good at your job, he said. You're leading people. I'm recommending you for a senior position. I left the building that day with a feeling I hadn't known in years, stability that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. That night, as I walked home, the city lights flickered on one by one. My phone buzzed again, this time with a new message. It was from my sister Ava. The last person I expected. I heard about Dad. I'm scared, Hannah. I don't know what to do. Her message was short, uncertain, without the sharp edges I remembered. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Take a breath. You'll figure it out. But I can't fix this for you. A few minutes later, another text came through. I didn't mean what I said before about you. You were right. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I put the phone down and stood by the window watching the city glow below. The ache I'd carried for years had changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was release. Later that week, I called Grandma again to tell her everything. She listened quietly, then said, You've done what most people never can, Hannah. You've turned pain into boundaries. The following Sunday, I walked through Central Park just as the first buds of spring were opening. The air smelled faintly of rain and fresh grass. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. My parents' world was crumbling, but mine was finally steady. Justice hadn't come from revenge. It came from choosing peace over their chaos. And though part of me would always wish things had been different, I knew I'd made the right choice. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unfinished lingered, a quiet space between endings and beginnings. I didn't know it yet, but the next message I'd receive would close that gap for good, bringing the story full circle in a way I never saw coming. A week after that last message from Ava, a letter arrived at my apartment. Not an email or a text, an actual handwritten letter folded neatly inside a plain white envelope. The handwriting was careful, but shaky, and for a moment I thought it might be from my grandmother. But when I turned it over, my mother's name was written in the corner. I sat at my small kitchen table for a long time before opening it. The first few lines were hesitant, almost formal. She wrote that she'd wanted to call again, but didn't think I'd answer. She said she had spent months watching their world come apart, my father stepping down, friends disappearing, neighbors whispering. We built everything around appearances, she wrote, and when those disappeared, so did the people. Then the tone shifted. I didn't understand what strength meant until I saw what you became without us. I thought we were protecting Ava, but we were really hiding from our own mistakes. I'm sorry, Hannah. I truly am. There was no excuse, no plea for forgiveness, just quiet remorse. She ended by saying that my father had taken a consulting job out of state and that they were living modestly now. It's strange, she wrote, but we talk more honestly in this small rented house than we ever did when everything looked perfect. I folded the letter carefully and set it beside my coffee mug. The words didn't erase the years of hurt, but they carried something I hadn't expected: humility. It was the first time in my life my mother had spoken to me without judgment or pride. That weekend I called my grandparents to tell them about the letter. Grandma's voice was soft with relief. People change slowly, she said, but sometimes they really do. Grandpa added from the background, doesn't mean you forget what they did, just means you don't have to carry it forever. I smiled through the lump in my throat. They were right. In the months that followed, life in New York settled into a steady rhythm. My small financial literacy project grew faster than I expected. What began as weekend workshops turned into a sponsored program for first-generation college students. Elliot helped me present it to the firm's board, and before long, they agreed to fund it permanently. We called it the Brooks Initiative, named after my grandparents. The first class met that spring in a borrowed conference room. 20 students sat in a circle, notebooks open, ready to learn how to manage money, negotiate salaries, and protect their futures. I told them the truth that I'd learned every lesson the hard way. Their faces softened when they realized I wasn't just teaching numbers. I was teaching what I'd lived through. By summer, I returned to Cape Cod for a visit. The house looked the same, the white fence, the blue shutters, the smell of salt in the breeze. My grandparents greeted me with open arms, and that evening we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the dunes. Grandma reached over and patted my hand. You know, she said, peace doesn't always come from making things right with others. Sometimes it comes from knowing you finally made things right with yourself. The next morning I took a walk along the beach. The tide was low and the water glimmered under a soft gray sky. For the first time I thought about my parents not with bitterness, but with a kind of calm distance. I didn't know if I'd ever see them again, but I hoped they were finding their way the same way I had. When I returned home to New York, a small package was waiting on my doorstep. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with 4 simple words. "We're proud of you." No note, no signature, just the words. I didn't need to ask who it came from. I slipped it on my wrist, knowing that even if the past couldn't be rewritten, this was a start. That night, I stood by my window, looking out over the city lights. It struck me how different silence felt now. It wasn't emptiness anymore, it was peace, the kind you earn when you stop begging for love that has conditions. I thought about the girl I'd been at graduation, staring at 3 empty seats, wondering what was wrong with her. And I thought about the woman standing here now, whole, steady, no longer waiting to be chosen. Maybe justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it's simply living well in the space they said you'd never fill. Sometimes it's loving yourself enough to walk away and still hoping the ones who hurt you learn to do the same. If you've ever had to build a new kind of family or learn how to forgive from a distance, I hope my story reminds you that peace isn't given, it's built piece by piece. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, and if this story spoke to you, share it with someone who might need a little reminder that healing can start quietly, even after years of noise.